It's great to be back with both of you. So, Andrew, I want to start with you. I mean, there is a real question here, which I don't think any of us know the answer to, as to how much money Giuliani actually has, what he'll be able to pay for. Were you surprised by the judgment? And what are kind of the options for figuring that out and getting some of this money to these women?
Well, regardless of whether there's any money, in terms of its deterrent effect on Rudy Giuliani and his ilk, it is an important judgment. And as you mentioned, the bravery of these two women, like the bravery of E. Jean Carroll, to not be just victims, but to seek legal accountability is important, regardless of whether they ever see a dime of the judgment. But Mr. Gottlieb is going to be just as tenacious in terms of finding any assets of Mr. Giuliani. And remember, even if he goes into bankruptcy, this kind of judgment is not wiped out by bankruptcy. So they're entitled to continue looking and to take depositions and discovery. It's important to remember that one of the reasons that Rudy Giuliani was in the position he was in is because he was in contempt over and over again when Beryl Howell, the judge on the case, ordered discovery to be mutual, and he just did not participate. He didn't say where his assets were. He didn't say anything about that. If he continues to do that, the one thing that the judge has not yet done but can do is put him in jail. So there are still remedies for the judge to make sure that every asset he has is disclosed, and if not, to take action.
I mean, Michael Gottlieb, I've known him a long time. He's very tenacious. I wouldn't want to face any of you in a court, so I'm not going to put myself in that position. So, Neil, one of the questions I've been wondering, I mean, there was a startling numbers in terms of the amount of money that Giuliani had to pay lawyers just for this case. And he's, of course, facing civil suits from Smartmatic, Dominion Voting Systems, as well as from Hunter Biden. I mean, others I may be missing here, a former assistant. His money he would have to pay lawyers, which could be in the millions, right? Is that something he'll still be allowed to do, even as he owes these women $148 million?
So first of all, I just want to say, when I look at these women, Jen, I just, I see really the best of America. I mean, it's important to remember these were like poll workers. These are people working on election integrity, and they just got swept up in this and all of these lies and so on. And thanks to Michael Gottlieb's tenacity and the tenacity of these women, finally there's some accountability. There still hasn't really been any accountability for Donald Trump, but we're starting to see it with Trump's minions, whether it be Fox or Giuliani or the like. With respect to the dollars, I do think that Giuliani can pay some attorney's fees. That's, the bankruptcy law permits. But past that, Andrew's absolutely right that because these are what we call intentional torts, bankruptcy can't stay the proceedings, and Giuliani will have to put up an appeal bond. Is it going to be? Does he have $148 million? No, I'm not even sure that Rudy Giuliani can afford to pay for 4 seasons landscaping right now, let alone $48 million. But nonetheless, I think whatever he's got is now going to be seized by these two plaintiffs.
That's a real throwback there, Neil. I like what you did there. So, Andrew, I mean, this was a civil judgment, a big one. But the big question here, is there any implications from this for his criminal case? Like, for instance, does this increase the pressure on him to cooperate with Fani Willis, given there's obviously an overlap in what he did here?
Well, there are implications in that the prosecutors can see how a jury assessed their credibility and how they did as plaintiffs. Because remember, civil and criminal are working in parallel, and the allegations that are with respect to Ruby Freeman and Shaye Moss are at the center of some of the charges in Georgia, and they are also part of the criminal case in D.C. So these two women will be witnesses in both of those cases. And so the prosecutors clearly are going to look at that and think, okay, this will be a very strong part of the case. In terms of the pressure on Rudy Giuliani to cooperate, I would say at this point, I mean, there's been tons of pressure in terms of the criminal case, in terms of the monetary damages. I think the bigger issue is I don't think that if I were a prosecutor, he would be high on my list of people to cooperate. As you pointed out, Jen, he continued to tell lies and to defame these women through the trial that he just lost. So this is not the kind of candidate who you want to cooperate. He will see his criminal day in court. A jury will decide. And if he ends up getting convicted and go to jail, I mean, it'll be a very sad day in terms of the demise of Rudy Giuliani, but he will get what he deserves.
That's right. It's quite a journey he has taken. Neal Katyal, Andrew Weissmann, thank you as always for joining me and for informing us so much on these cases.